The classroom noise faded to nothing as Miss Elena Ramirez collected the final test papers from her sixth grade class. 28 papers stacked neatly in her hands. 28 stories about safe places from 28 young hearts. But when she glanced down at the top page, her breath stalled. Blank. Just a name scrolled in the corner. Dante Martinez. No doodles, no eraser marks, no words at all. A single sheet of silence. Her gaze lifted. Dante sat slouched in a far corner, his pencil rolled to the edge of his desk, unsharpened, untouched. A notebook bulged from his backpack, the cover torn and scribbled with half-finished drawings. His dark eyes stayed fixed on the grain of the desk, unblinking, like meeting her gaze might cost him something he couldn't afford. The red pen in her hand hovered over her gradebook. The failing mark seemed obvious, automatic, but her hand froze. His small shoulders were drawn in tight like armor. His blank page felt less like defiance, more like a wall, a deliberate silence. She exhaled slowly, torn between rules and instinct. Every part of her training said to record the grade, keep moving, hold the line. But something about the boy's stillness pressed against her like resistance, a quiet battle she hadn't been trained for. She set the pen down and whispered to herself, why would a child choose silence? She thought it was just a test. She had no idea it would test her. Every blank page is an invitation. What story will you fill it with? Let us know in the comments. And subscribe for more stories that inspire courage and change. Elena Ramirez was 28 years old and carrying the weight of dreams, effort, and grief that wouldn't let go. Just 3 months earlier, she'd buried her younger brother, Miguel, 25, a poet who never shared his verses, a songwriter who kept his melodies locked in leather-bound journals beneath his bed. Now, the absence pressed on her chest like a stone she could neither swallow nor spit out. In the quiet of her cramped apartment, the radio clacked. The hum of the refrigerator filled the gaps, and she did what she'd done every evening since starting at Roosevelt Middle School. She opened Miguel's journal, the one she'd found after the accident, and traced a half-finished stanza with her fingertip. Ink smudges, unfinished rhymes, sentences abandoned mid-line. Every page a reminder of all he'd held back. You had so much to say, she whispered, her voice splintering. Why didn't you tell me? The silence that answered her felt achingly familiar. It was the same silence she'd faced in her classroom that day. The silence of a blank page, of words trapped and trembling. Teaching was supposed to be her rebellion against silence. She had chosen this profession because she believed in stories, in the alchemy that happened when children discover their voices. But as she sat at her desk, Miguel's ghost surrounding her, she wondered if that belief was naive. Some voices, it seemed, didn't want to be heard, or worse, they weren't safe to be heard. That morning's assignment had felt straightforward when she scrolled it across the whiteboard. Describe a place that make you feel safe. 2 paragraphs minimum. Use details and sensory language. A standard activity, nothing radical. A way to ease new 6th graders into creative writing. She remembered how they bent over their desks, pencil scratching, brows furrowed. Some wrote of bedrooms. Other kitchens were filled with their grandmother's cooking. One boy even described the corner booth at the pizza shop. Normal answers, normal kids. And then, there was Dante Martinez. He'd written only his name. She could still picture the way his pencil hovered above the paper like a helicopter afraid to land. The way his left hand trembled on the desk edge. The way his eyes flicked to the clock as if waiting for an unseen countdown. By the time she collected this paper, The page still stared back at her, empty, accusing. Now, hours later, her laptop glowed in the dim light. The gradebook cursor blinked beside his name, urging her to type an F and move on. A rule was a rule. Her mentor teacher had warned her not to cuddle students, especially the quiet ones. They'll walk all over you, he said. The system valued neat columns and measurable outputs, but her hands refused to move. Because how do you grade silence? How do you measure the weight of words left unspoken? The next morning arrived with a gray October drizzle that turns the world to watercolor. Elena pulled into the Roosevelt Middle School parking lot 30 minutes early, windshield wipers clicking in weary rhythm. She liked the quiet before the chaos. The way empty hallways gave her room to breathe before the tide of voices rose. Inside, the building smelled like industrial disinfectant and teenage anxiety. That peculiar mix, both sterile and human. She was almost to her classroom when she saw him. Principal Jonathan Moore leaned against her doorway, coffee cup in hand, his pressed shirt collar still damp from the rain. "Elena," he greeted, voice brisk. "How's the first month treating you?" "Kids adjusting to the curriculum?" It was a simple question, but Elena caught the weight underneath. Are you following the pacing guide? Are you preparing them for assessments? Are you keeping us off the district's radar? "They're engaged," she said carefully, unlocking her door. Creative writing seems to resonate with them. Good. Moore stepped inside, scanning the bulletin boards where she'd posted student work. "Just remember, December brings district assessments. These kids need to nail the 5-paragraph essay. We can't afford to lose ground to creative detours." Something inside her tightened. He hadn't raised his voice, but the reminder landed like a chain across her desk. She thought of Miguel, his half-finished poem still stacked on her nightstand, and wondered what someone like Moore would have said about them. "Of course," she said, though her throat felt raw. "I know you mean well," Moore added, gentler now. "But remember, we measure success in scores, not stories." When he left, silence pressed against the walls of her classroom. The posters of fictional heroes seemed to watch her, their printed smiles paper thin. For a flicker of a second, she wondered if she'd made a mistake leaving her old job. Roosevelt had better pay and steadier benefits, but at what cost? The first bell cut through her thoughts, and the river of students poured in. Elena pasted on her teacher's smile, calling out greetings as backpacks thumped against desks. Her gaze slid to the back corner. Dante. He arrived 30 seconds before the late bell, moving like smoke, insubstantial and unnoticed. His backpack landed with a metallic clink she now recognized. Bottles, always bottles, rattling like hidden alarms. He sat without meeting her eyes. "Good morning, class," she began, though her voice trailed towards him. "Today, we'll review essays, but first, I want to—" She stopped. Dante was staring at her. Not just staring, pinning with her eyes that carried both fear and defiance, as if daring her to look away first. Something shifted inside her. She dropped her lesson plan on the desk. "Actually, we're doing something different today." Chairs creaked as students straightened, sensing change. "I want to talk about why we write," Elena said, words gathering momentum. "Not because of grades or tests, but because sometimes what's inside us is too big to carry alone." Sarah raised her hand. "Like in our journals?" "Exactly, but bigger than journals." Elena turned to the whiteboard and scrolled in firm, looping letters. "The stories we don't tell are the ones that tell us." She underlined it, then faced the room. "What do you think that means?" Silence stretched, heavy as fog, and then, from the back corner, a whisper. "It means that things we don't say control us." Heads turned in unison. Dante, hand hovering near his mouth as if he could shove the words back inside, looked stunned at himself. Elena's heart leaped. Yes, she said softly, afraid to break the spell. Dante, would you share more? But the wall came slamming back. His shoulders curled, his eyes dropped, and he shook his head in a sharp refusal. The moment evaporated, but not for Elena. She pressed on, telling the class that even recognizing truth was a kind of bravery. They moved through grammar drills and reading passages, but her mind kept circling that whisper. When the dismissal bell rang, she made her choice. Dante, she called gently as students backed up. Can you stay for a moment? He froze, half-zipped backpack in his hands. For an instant, she thought he'd bolt, but then he lowered the bag and sat, rigid, while the room emptied. Elena dragged a chair beside him, lowering herself so she wouldn't tower. I wanted to ask about yesterday's test. His fingers tightened on the desk. I'm not in trouble, am I? No, she said quickly. You're not in trouble. I just wanted to understand your essay. I forgot, he mumbled. Elena shook her head. No, you didn't forget. You sat with that pencil for half an hour. You wanted to write but weren't sure if it was safe. At that, he looked at her, his eyes dark, tired, older than 12, burnt with the pain that glowed straight through her ribs. Why didn't you just give me an F? His voice cracked. Because I don't think you failed, she said. You made a choice. That blank page, it wasn't nothing, it was the truth. His lips trembled. His knuckles were white against the wood. He whispered, barely audible, safe places don't exist. The words cut through her like a blade. She thought of Miguel, of all the poems he'd hidden under his bed because the world had told him it wasn't safe to share. She wanted to tell Dante he was wrong, that she could build him safety, that she would protect his voice, but he spoke again before she could. You can't promise that, he said, almost spitting it. Adults always say things they don't mean. The rain tapped harder against the window. Elena searched his face and saw the war raging inside him, the desperate hunger to be heard, colliding with the bone-deep certainty that being heard was dangerous. She leaned closer, her own voice trembling. What if, just in this room, for 1 hour a day, your words could matter? Dante's backpack shifted as he lifted it, bottles clinking like broken glass. He stood, half turned towards the door. What if the truth is too ugly? He asked. And then he walked out. That evening, Elena sat in her car long after the buses had rolled out of the Roosevelt parking lot. The dashboard clock glowed 6:47 p.m., and the October light had already thinned to shadows. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached, but she couldn't turn the key. She kept hearing Principal Moore's voice. We measure success in scores, not stories. She kept seeing Dante's face when he whispered, safe places don't exist. And behind it all, Miguel's journal lay in her bag on the passenger seat like a weight, every unspoken line reminding her of the cost of silence. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. For a moment, she almost ignored it, afraid that even a friendly voice might break her resolve. Then she picked up. I think I'm about to do something stupid, she said without a greeting. Good, Olivia shot back immediately. Her best friend's voice was steady, certain. You've been playing it safe for too long. Tell me. Elena told her about Dante, the blank page, the assignment that wasn't on any pacing guide. Moore's going to hate it, she admitted. It's not preparing them for the tests. But it's preparing them for life, Olivia said. You're seeing the kids behind the scores, Elena. That's rare. Don't bury it because someone wants tidy data points on the spreadsheet. The words steadied her. But when the call ended, silence swept back in, sharp as a glass. Elena reached for Miguel's letter journal, opened to the page where she had read 100 times. The one about secrets too heavy to carry alone. Her eyes traced the faded pencil lines. Some stories are too heavy for one person to hold, but too dangerous for two people to share. So we carry them alone until they break us, or we find the courage to set them down. She pressed her palm flat against the page. I should have asked, she whispered. I should have made space for you. But Miguel was gone. Dante wasn't. By the time she pulled out of the lot, her decision had hardened like stone. She would risk more, risk complaints, risk everything. Better to gamble her career than let another child drown in silence. The next morning, she walked into her classroom with a new lesson plan tucked inside her binder. For the first time in months, her pulse wasn't dulled by grief. It raced, equal parts terror and exhilaration. She set up the desks, arranged the papers, and rehearsed the words she would use. She was halfway through erasing the whiteboard when a shadow filled her doorway. Principal Moore leaned against the frame, arms folded. Elena, he said evenly, we need to talk. Her stomach dropped. He knows. I heard from a few parents last night. Moore continued. Apparently, you asked students to share personal stories? Elena forced her voice to stay calm. It's a creative writing exercise. I told them to write the stories they've never told, not to share it out loud, not to expose trauma, but to just put it on the page. Moore's brow tightened. Parents don't see it that way. Parents don't see it that way. They're worried you're encouraging their kids to unpack trauma without support. One mother told me her daughter came home asking about family secrets. Hate flushed Elena's cheeks. I'm not prying into trauma. I'm giving them permission to acknowledge their own voices. Elena, Moore's tone sharpened. Stick to the curriculum. These kids need grammar and essay structure, not therapy. No more experimental assignments. You're on probation until winter break. One more complaint, and we'll be having a different kind of conversation. He left her standing at the board, the ghost of his warning echoing in the empty room. She looked at her carefully prepared lesson plan, the one she'd stayed up until 2 in the morning crafting. She could rip it up, bury it under worksheets and standardized activities, pretend she didn't notice the pain in her students' eyes, pretend her brother's journal wasn't whispering to her from her bed, or she could risk everything. When the first period fled in, Elena's heart hammered. 28 faces blinked back at her, some eager, some bored, some shuddered, and in the back corner, Dante sat in his fortress of silence, his pencil tapping the desk. Yesterday, Elena began, her voice steady though her chest felt tight. I asked you to write a story you've never told. Some of you may wonder why. Some of your parents might have questions. But here's the truth. Stories have power. The ones we share, the ones we bury, the ones we're afraid will make others uncomfortable. They shape us. Jasmine raised her hand, nervous. What if our parents don't want us to tell certain stories? You never have to share them with anyone, Elena said gently. Not even me. This isn't about exposing family secrets. It's about permitting yourself to speak, even if only to the page. A quiet boy named Marcus asked, what if the story makes people uncomfortable? Then, it probably needs to be told. Elena said simply. She turned to the board and wrote in bold letters, your story matters, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Especially if it makes others uncomfortable. For a long moment, the classroom was silent. Then, pencils began to move. The room filled with new kind of sound, not the mechanical scratching of test taking, but the raw urgency of truth finding its way onto paper. When the bell rang, the students hesitated, clutching their pages like fragile glass. One by one, they turned them in. Marcus, Jasmine, Sarah, stories of absent fathers, silent grief, hidden hunger. At last, Dante approached. His paper was folded into a small tight square, as if secrecy would be pressed into corners. His hands shook as he placed it on her desk. Miss Ramirez, he whispered, what if someone reads this and doesn't want me anymore? Elena blinked back tears. Then they weren't worthy of you, but I promise you, nothing you write will make me want you any less. Dante nodded once, then fled before his courage cracked. Alone after school, Elena opened the stack. Each page revealed a hidden battle. Marcus's father vanishes into a taxi. Jasmine swallowed her grief in silence. Sarah is counting calories like prison bars. And then, Dante's. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Words spilled across the page. Urgent, jagged. I know which floorboards creak when Dad comes home angry. I cover my brother's ears so he won't learn that love sounds like breaking glass. I tell lies to teachers so no one knows. If they found out, they might take us away. Then, who would protect him? But sometimes, I wonder what it would feel like to be the kid instead of the parent. I want to believe quiet can mean safe again. The letters blurred as Elena pressed a hand to her mouth. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't defiance. This was survival etched in pencil. She thought of Moore's mantra. We measure success in scores, not stories. But holding Dante's paper, Elena knew the truth. Some victories would never show up on a spreadsheet. Some successes were as fragile and profound as a child finally daring to set down the weight of silence. The weeks that followed blurred into small rebellions. Elena kept assigning creative writing alongside the mandated curriculum. Each exercise a quiet act of defiance. She watched her students shift, Marcus raising his hand more often, Jasmine sharing a poem about her grandmother, Sarah finding comfort eating lunch in her classroom, and Dante, he was unfolding, still quiet, still carrying those bottles in his backpack, but his voice began to emerge in class discussions. Then, one afternoon, she found a note slipped between graded essays. Miss Ramirez, thank you for making space for the stories we were afraid to tell. I never thought anyone would want to hear about the hard parts. Dante. Elena pressed it to her chest. Whatever the cost, it was worth it. That cost seemed to arrive on a Tuesday. Principal Moore summoned her with their lesson plans in hand. She braced for the reprimand, only to find District Supervisor Janet Wells waiting in the office. Elena's personal file lay open on the desk. But instead of accusations, Wells offered a praise. Parents had called, not with complaints but with gratitude. Students' test scores had risen sharply. 3 had qualified for the advanced writing program, all on the strength of their storytelling assignments. We'd like you to pilot your approach district-wide, Wells said. Trauma-informed creative writing, the authentic voice initiative. Elena sat stunned. I thought I was being fired. Moore gave her a rare smile. Elena, you reminded us what teaching is meant to be. She returned to class dizzy with disbelief, only to find Dante waiting at her door, a handwritten story in hand. It's about what safe would look like, he said. And that afternoon, he stood in front of his peers and read aloud. His voice shook, then grew steady. He wrote of a home filled with laughter, where quiet meant peace instead of fear, where safe wasn't a dream but a destination. When he finished, the room was silent, not heavy, not reverent. Not heavy, but reverent. For the first time, Dante's silence had broken into shreds. That night, Elena opened Miguel's old journal and wrote to him, "Your story didn't end with your death. It lives, and every time a child finds the courage to write the words they once hid. Silence doesn't have to be a prison. It can be the boss before courage." Months later, Elena presented the Authentic Voice Initiative at the State Education Conference. The program had spread across the district. Test scores were up, but more importantly, engagement was alive. In the third row sat Dante, grinning beside his proud mother. His essay had just won the state writing competition. The bravest story, Elena told the audience, isn't always the one you grade. It's the one a child finally dares to tell. The thunderous applause barely registered. She was thinking of Miguel, of the stories he never told, of the blank pages that never found a listener. After the presentation, Dante slipped her a small leather journal. On the cover, "For the stories still waiting to be told." Inside, the first page read, "Once upon a time, there was a teacher who believed every story mattered. She created a classroom where silence became songs and blank pages became bridges." Tears blurred Elena's vision. This was the legacy she hadn't expected. Miguel's silence transformed into voices across classrooms, students daring to speak truths the world once ignored. The next morning, she wrote a new quote on the board. "Every blank page is a question. What story are you brave enough to tell today?" Her students entered not just a classroom, but a sanctuary they had built together. Marcus handed her a poem about forgiveness. Sarah showed her a journal filled with recovery notes. And Dante stepped forward to add beneath her quote, "Every story told makes space for the next one." Elena looked around the circle of desks, 28 voices strong, and felt the ripple of something unstoppable. The blank page was never empty. It had only been waiting for someone to believe it deserved to be filled. Everyday heroes are all around us.